religions class. And of course, today is going to be about Sikhism. And we've talked about the Baha'i Faith, we've talked about Hinduism and Buddhism. So currently this is a monthly class. And I am Jeremy Fricke. I'm Education Director. I have a master's in religious studies, and Sikhism is honestly one of my favorite religions to learn about. And I'm interested. Heard of Sikhism in the first place? Just like raise your hand. Okay, so about maybe half. And how many of you have met a Sikh person, to your knowledge? Very few. Looks like maybe nobody.
Me.
Oh, you have? Good. Yeah, so I do want to start off with just kind of why I find it important to learn and teach and talk about Sikhism. There's a lot of religions out there, and Sikhism is not on the forefront of a lot of people's minds. So, but throughout this, we'll also talk about the historical context of Sikhism, common practices, core beliefs, a little bit about what's going on today and recently with Sikhism, and then we'll talk a little bit about resources that we can look at. So firstly, Sikhism is very important to me for a few reasons. If you know much about me, I feel very strongly that people should learn about a wide range of religions. And just to be a little personal for a second, one of the big reasons why I feel that way is because, a decade ago or so, I was pretty Islamophobic. And there were two religions that I learned about that helped me to move away from that a little bit. And Islam was sort of the third religion in some ways. I had to learn about some other people first to be able to really accept new points of view. So the first was the Baha'i Faith, which I've talked about in a previous class. And then the second was Sikhism. Sikhs, or Sikhs, so it's said either way, are very involved with interfaith dialogue, and you'll be able to see why as we go through the class today. They also are the fifth largest religion in the world. They actually hold a higher population than Jewish people, and they take a lot of the brunt in the Western world for Islamophobia. The very first person to be killed after 9/11 was actually a Sikh man who was outside the gas station that he owned, and he was shot. So let's go a little bit through some historical context of where and when this religion came to be. So the religion came to be in the Punjab region. During this time period, about 1469 is the birth of the founder. During this time, there wasn't the Indian partition yet. The Indian partition of the countries comes out, hundreds of years later. But there's kind of this area, this region that is understood as the Punjab. And during this time, there is a rapid growth of religious diversity. The area has a particularly large amount of Muslims and Hindus. The majority are Hindus, but Islam is growing in the area. And there are some minorities of Christians and Jains and Buddhists. We haven't talked about Jainism in this class, but Jainism is another religion from India that has a long history. So the two movements within Islam and Hinduism that are really going to influence this religion are Sufi Islam. How many of you have heard of Sufi Islam? Okay, so most of you. So Sufi Islam is a very mystical tradition of Islam, very much about meditating on God and doing some physical practices that kind of help remind you of God. Very, very devotional, very spiritual. And then Bhakti Hinduism, which is a pretty new movement at this time, but it also takes some of the similar ideas of Sufi Islam. It's very, very devotional, very much about being sort of one with the divine, very, very much about this sort of relationship feeling, these very spiritual feelings. Before this time, it was a little more about practices, community building, those kinds of things. So, like I said, Nanak, who is the founder of Sikhism, was born in 1469 in Talwandi. Talwandi is very, very close to where Lahore is in this picture. He spends a lot of time in Lahore also throughout his young life. But so today it is in Pakistan, but it was kind of centrally located in the Punjab region. Also, something that will be kind of part of the context of all this, but I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about the history of, is the Mughal Empire, which was a series of Muslim emperors of this region, the Punjab and India and part of Pakistan, that lasted from 1526 to 1827. So the Mughal Empire kind of starts just after Nanak and ends shortly after the final Guru that we talk about today. All right, so a little bit about Guru Nanak. He was born of a Hindu family. Again, his town was very religiously diverse. He knew many Muslims and Hindus, especially. And the merchant caste is sort of upper middle caste. He also is seen as deeply spiritual from a very young age. And there's a group of stories about him called the Janam Sakhis. That is a collection of these stories. They're kind of like, some of the micro stories you might see in the Gospels of Christianity, or the Hadith. These kind of like micro stories that kind of talk about some kind of lesson from Sikhism. We also should talk a little bit about how there is this term called the Guru, and Guru has different meanings to different religious groups. They are interrelated because it all comes from India. The term comes from India, and it really means teacher, but it also has some connotation of lord, or kind of person with a lot of responsibility, power, and authority. It kind of combines those two ideas. And we'll talk a little bit more about the Guru and Sikhism in a minute here. But as I said, at a young age, he was always very spiritual. But when he grew to the age of 30, he took his normal bath in the river nearby in his little town, and he disappeared for 3 days. A lot of people say that he disappeared under the water. They thought he was gone, but he emerged 3 days later, and the first thing he says is, "There is no Hindu, there is no Muslim, and Ik Onkar," which means God is one. Would anyone like to see what do you think there is no Hindu, there is no Muslim means?
I'm going to shoot for it. I'm guessing he said that in reference to try to unite everybody and to stop looking for divisions under God, at least for theologians anyway.
Yeah. So there's two ways that this is interpreted. One is that way, that there's kind of this statement that religions, that he's claiming a universal religion, and that the sort of names serve to divide us more than to unite us under the beauty of that religion. The other way that it is interpreted sometimes is that people were not fully practicing Hinduism and Islam in the way that he believed they should, that they didn't quite reach the level of deserving the name. So those two things are pretty popular ways to interpret that, both kind of the negative and the positive way. In Ikankar, God is one. So very soon after this experience, he writes a series of shabads, which shabads are a type of hymn in Sikhism, and we'll go into a little bit how those interact with Sikhism soon. But one of the first ones he writes is the Mool Mantra, and this logo over here, this icon, this is Ik Onkar in the Gurmukhi Script. Just to go off track a little bit here, the Gurmukhi Script is actually an alphabet that Nanak had the experience of receiving from God in his point of view. So this is like a new alphabet. It uses a lot of the language of the area, but the alphabet is different. So I'm just going to read this out loud. There is one supreme being, the eternal reality, the creator, without fear, devoid of enmity, immortal, never incarnated, self-existent, known by the grace of the Guru. Would anyone like to look at this and see if they noticed anything in common or different, maybe from what their own religious tradition says?
As someone who formerly strictly identified as a Christian, obviously we have the devil. So God is the supreme benevolent being, and the devil is Lex Luthor, more or less. That's just what I've experienced as in my youth.
Okay. I also want to mention that the ik part of Ik Onkar is actually the numeral one. It's not just the word one, it's the numeral one. And that this is to show how serious he is about the singularity of the divine. We'll talk a little bit more about what that might mean a little bit later. So the other major idea that Nanak brings from this revelation, if you will, is the term Waheguru, and this is the primary name of God in Sikhism. There are other names, but Waheguru is particularly special, and it basically means wonderful teacher, which I personally find very beautiful. And as a side note, Sikh means student or disciple. So teacher and disciple, that's the way that they view their primary relationship with God. And this is the spelling in Gurmukhi, I believe. All right, so one of the biggest practices that Guru Nanak puts in place is a thing called langar. And langar is pictured here. Langar is simply a lunch. It literally means kitchen. And what Nanak wanted to do was create a community kitchen where everybody could eat for free. And this is more complicated than it sounds in some ways, because we also have to recognize that there's a caste system, there's some religious tensions, there's some racial tensions, there's some gender dynamics to be concerned about. But he did not want to make any exceptions for that. That everyone would have to sit at the same level unless they're serving food. So they all sit on the ground. Everyone would need to be able to eat the same food. So they serve vegetarian food. They are not required to be vegetarian though. They serve vegetarian food to make sure that anyone can eat there. Some now serve vegan food because of how things have changed, but vegetarian food is a standard here. So when Guru Nanak was kind of nearing the end of his life, he decided, I have a community being built and I need a successor. So he decided that while he did have children, he decided that he would not actually name any of his children as successors. He thought that that might cause an issue with sort of that caste system. So he decided to choose someone else. Now, all the gurus happen to be of the same caste, if we were to go back into like their background, but the goal was to not keep it too patrilineal. So we're not going to go through all of these gurus today, but it's important to understand that Sikhs view, while Nanak is kind of centralized, they see every guru as sort of extensions of Nanak, that they hold the same authority as Nanak does. So you have Guru Angad, Guru Amar Das, Guru Ram Das, and then there's two gurus that we're going to be talking about a little bit more, and that's Guru Arjan, who's the 5th, and then Guru Gobind Singh, who's the 10th. But all of them are very important, and I believe every single one of them wrote some of the hymns that are very important that we'll talk a little bit more about soon. So Guru Arjan is the one who oversaw some of the biggest developments in Sikhism. So firstly, he oversaw the building of the Golden Temple, or the Harmandir Sahib. And not only did he oversee the building of the Golden Temple, but he really wanted to make sure that the religious diversity in the area was represented when they built the Golden Temple. So he requested a Muslim mystic to set the first stone of the temple. There was no expectation for the Muslim to convert, and he never did. He just set the stone. Many of the gurus had very close relationships with mystics from Islam and Hinduism. And he also oversaw the first version of the Adi Granth, which was the original scripture, if you will, for Sikhism. We'll talk a little bit about it more soon, but the original scripture, or the main scripture of Sikhism, is this huge book of hymns, and they're written by all the gurus and many mystics, both from Sikhism and Islam and Hinduism. He is also the first guru to die as a martyr. So under Guru Nanak, the relations were actually pretty good. If you know anything about the Mughal Empire, Emperor Akbar, which was the first one, was actually extremely religiously tolerant. He created basically a panel or committee, if you will, of different religious minorities to kind of help him be advised on things. But over time, over the course of the couple of centuries here, different emperors came into power, and some of those were a lot harsher on religious minorities. So he ended up dying because he wouldn't deny Sikhism. And this picture over here is a picture of one of the hymns from the Adi Granth. And here is also a picture of the Golden Temple in Amritsar, India. Again, it's accessible to anybody who wants to go. I'm going to talk a little bit more about their places of worship soon, but this truly is gilded with gold, and under that fifth guru, this was built, as well as the water surrounding it, this kind of man-made lake. Many people, like I believe their wait list of volunteers to provide langar is like tens of thousands of people long, because people want so badly to give food. So I also wanted to provide here, so this is one of the prayers of the Adi Granth, and this one is written by Guru Arjan Dev Ji. If anyone would like to read it, they can. I can also read it if people are uncomfortable. Okay, I will read.
I can read it.
Oh, you'd like to? Okay.
I see no stranger. I see no enemy. Wherever I look, God is all I see. I don't think of us and them, nor do I hate or condemn. I see God's image, each one a friend. Of any religion, caste, or race, all I see is God's shining face. Acceptance as beautiful, all his design. Let me read that one again. Acceptance as beautiful, all his design. I learned truth in, is it Sagat? Divine.
Sangat.
Sangat divine. The world resides in me and you. Wahagaru, Wahagaru. In him, in her, in me, in you. Wahagaru, Wahagaru. Beholding in every being his light, I bloom like a flower in joy and delight.
So this is a good example of a lot of the hymns in the in there. Now, obviously, this one is translated. This is translated by a Sikh person who tried to retain the poetry of it, so that it would rhyme just like it does in Punjabi. But and just as a side note, Sangat is community. That's basically what it means. It's spiritual community. All right, so that fifth guru, Guru Arjan, was martyred, and the conflict continued to rise. We have multiple gurus afterward who started to realize that the Sikhs had to sort of defend themselves, and over time they were actually seen as people who defended religious minorities in general. So, as I said, this area was religiously diverse, but each like region within the region might be controlled by different religious groups, and they were known to go and defend the persecuted regardless. So if the violence was Hindus against Muslims, then they would defend the Muslims, and if the violence was Muslims against Hindus, they would defend the Hindus. And this kind of was something they became very known for. But over time, we get to the ninth guru, who was also martyred, and he was actually martyred in battle defending Hindus. And the 10th guru, Guru Gobind Singh realized that this was deeply problematic. And not just him being martyred, but one of the things that he was particularly bothered by is there were some Sikhs who abandoned the battle and allowed him to die because they could get away without being seen. And Guru Gobind Singh felt, well, Sikhs should have to live to their values. They should not be able to hide from who they are. So he established a few things. One being the 5Ks. I'm skipping around a little bit. But he had this event, and I'll tell you the story here that's represented by this picture. So after this martyrdom, he holds a big event, and he asks for a human sacrifice. Who is willing to give their life for us? And someone came up, and he went inside his tent, and there was silence. And then Guru Gobind Singh comes out with a bloody sword. And he says again, who will be a human sacrifice? He does it again and again until the 5th person. And then when he comes out, they're all fine. They all come out alive, and they're all wearing the 5Ks, which we'll get to in a second. And they're called the Khalsa, which is basically the chosen warriors for the cause here. As part of this, they all are given a new name. Sikh men are generally given the surname Singh at the end of their name. Their last name is often replaced with Singh. And Sikh women are often Kaur, K-A-U-R, and Singh means lion and Kaur means princess. And the idea is similar to a lot of the teachings that you've heard already. Equality is very important between gender, race, religion, and caste. Caste is often tracked by their names. So in a sense, what he creates is a new and equitable caste by creating this Khalsa. So the Sikhs, one of the largest celebrations that they have every year is Vaisakhi, which is a huge celebration, especially big at the Golden Temple, and it commemorates this event. So going back, the reason, or the ways that Guru Gobind Singh makes sure that Sikhs are required to live to their values is by establishing these 5Ks. So before I get to the 5Ks, does anyone have any questions about the history component of this? Okay. Feel free to ask any questions in the chat too. So the 5Ks are Kara, Kanga, Kirpan, Kachera, and Kesh. So I'm going to go through each of these. The Kara is the bracelet in the picture. It's a bangle. And there's two ways that it's usually described. Number one is it symbolizes unity. It's one piece. It reminds people of the one God. It also used to designate slavery. So they are also kind of taking some component of sort of the lower caste with that. There's also the Kanga, which is the comb, and the comb is to represent, stay clean, and to help with the Kesh, which we'll talk about in a second. And then there's the Kirpan, which is this ceremonial sword. It's very important that it's understood as a sword. It's smaller today than it used to be, mostly because people don't like people walking around with big swords. it's smaller, but it's really to represent that they're always supposed to be ready to defend people who are under attack, because of that long history of protecting religious minorities. And then there's kachera, which is not pictured here, but it's an undergarment worn. And it was particularly important back then, because basically, again, shorts is basically what they are. So it would lend itself to battle, as well as it reminds them to be chaste and not lustful. And then there's kesh, which literally translates to the practice of not cutting one's hair. And all these things are very, very important to Sikhs. There's, if you watch the news, you'll see a lot of things about both in like the workplace or in the military or something like that, where they're trying to get approval to use some of these 5Ks. It's hard to understate how important it is to them. After 9/11, many Sikhs moved away from following some of these 5Ks because they were so fearful of the repercussions of this. So this is what a common Indian Sikh man looks like. So it's very common to wear a turban. It's expected to wear a turban among men and allowed among women. It's a symbol to some extent of a higher caste or royalty, and it works pretty well to keep hair out of your way if you have a lot of hair, right? These, after 9/11, with a lot of the videos of, Osama bin Laden in the turban, this caused a lot of issues for the Sikh community. They took a lot of the discrimination as well as Muslims after 9/11. There are also a few other practices. So daily prayers, they also have daily prayers. They have one early in the morning where it's called the Japji Sahib or Nitnam prayer. And then they have one in the evening and one at night. And they read a few hymns that are specific to the time each day that way. It's also very common to take an early morning shower or bath before those morning prayers, similar to how many Muslim prayers are. Their temples are called Gurdwaras, generally, which basically means house of the Guru. Gurdwaras have 4 doors on each side of the building to symbolize that everybody's welcome. You can come in from any side. I just want to reiterate the Langar piece. The Langar is a very core practice, and it's usually done after sort of a traditional service, if you will, among Sikhs. Sikhs don't have a Sabbath. They generally just go when it works. Some Gurdwaras have services every day. Some Gurdwaras kind of line up with Christianity and have services on Sundays because of ease of society, basically. But the Langar is always served after a service, and again, it's open to everybody. So legitimately, if you are traveling and you go to Denver, because I believe that's where the closest Gurdwara is, and you need food, go to the Gurdwara and they'll give you food, like any Gurdwara. Also, kids often will wear a patka instead of a turban. A turban is often worn after they kind of reach adulthood. This is often a cloth that kind of helps tie up the hair and often is worn underneath the turban. In fact, you might if you look here on that black portion is probably a padka for them as well, kind of like this. So for the vast majority of Sikhs, there are 10 gurus, but then there's sort of an 11th guru. When Guru Gobind Singh was nearing the end of his life, he recognized that I'm not exactly sure the reason. He decided that the final guru should be the granth, the book, the Adi Granth that we talked about earlier, and bestowed the title of Shri Guru Granth Sahib, which basically means holy book of the, or holy guru book lord. Those are the words. I'm not exactly sure what it means. But it's a very, very important title. It's treated as the guru today. You know, it's treated with a lot of respect, a lot of holiness. The Shri Guru Granth Sahib is 1,430 pages and has 5,894 shabads. That's how many hymns they have. You know, often they're just a couple of paragraphs. Almost all of them are pretty simple devotional hymns without much in the way of like practices or like laws being taught. Sorry. So we come to the core beliefs of Sikhs. So the first is seva. Seva can be understood as selfless service. There's a lot of ways that this selfless service can be, and the selfless service can be either mental, physical, or spiritual. So whatever you can give to others, you are to go through seva to do so, and it's a religious expectation. There are also the 3 pillars. So these are the 3 main beliefs that Guru Nanak suggested for all Sikhs to work with. And that is Nam Japo, which is to meditate on the name of God. So in Sikh practice, you often have sort of a repetition of the word Waheguru, or possibly a hymn that is particularly important for that day. That meditating on the name of God is a very cornerstone piece. So, like many Indian religions, Sikhism also believes in karma and on the some level of reincarnation and liberation from that reincarnation, which we've talked about a little bit in like the Hinduism piece and Buddhism even. And the way that you achieve liberation is to become one with God. And different people have different capacities. So some people are able to reach it through a very, very spiritual capacity of, truly connecting in relationship with the divine. Some have more material ways to do so. And one of the ways is through this second pillar, which is honest and diligent work. It's very important in Sikhism to make an honest living. That it actually reminds me a little bit of what is it, John Wesley, I think he says, basically make a lot of money and share a lot of money. That it's not bad to make money in Sikhism. It's part of it, but you should do it honestly. And then the third piece is to share with others, especially those less fortunate than you. again, that is not only through money, but also through Langar and other parts of Sikhism. And then the final piece, although there are many others, there are many beliefs, is Shardi Kala. Shardi Kala literally translates to relentless optimism. I recently read a book, and I'll show it in the resources section. There was a Sikh massacre in, I believe it was Wisconsin, about 4 years ago, by a white supremacist. There were a lot of, I think it was half a dozen people died, and a few others were injured. And that was very difficult for the Sikh community. But in this book, one of the sons of one of the people who deceased felt very strongly about Shardi Kala, that even though it's almost impossible, that you basically must have hope. Does anyone have any questions about any of those practices or beliefs, or any other, questions that I didn't even cover? Because just like any religion, Sikhism is so large. I'm not going to be able to cover the entirety of Sikhism in one class.
Sure, Jeremy, I know you said that there's more Sikh people than Jews, but they're one of the top 5 religions in the world. So what is the population? How many Sikhs are there in the world today?
I have that written down, actually. 30 million. It's not a whole lot bigger, I don't believe, than Judaism, but it is
twice as big.
Twice as big, yeah. So, and about 500,000 live in Canada, actually. So, yeah.
Jeremy, you talked about their head covering and that both males and females, boys and girls, cover their hair. In the image, I think is it Langar, the food, there were very simple head coverings and not as many turbans. Is there, I guess, is there a reason why you'd wear a turban compared to a different head covering? Something like that?
Yeah, so I'll kind of go through head coverings in general here. So firstly, there's a lot of ways to tie a turban. That's number one to know. The most common is that picture I showed you. These are not turbans, and they're not quite. They're more like patkas, like I showed with the child a little bit. I don't know where that went, but so generally, this is something that's provided to people who are having Langar who are not Sikh. So the expectation is to sort of defer authority, if you will, or not. Maybe that's not the right word. Respect the space, the place that houses the guru. You should cover your head.
Kind of like the yarmulkes at different synagogues for when walking. Okay. Right.
Yeah. Just like that. This specific one is just, it's probably like I didn't bring a head covering. This is what you'll probably get. Also, you can see this woman in blue here. It's probably most common for women to cover their hair with kind of a traditional headscarf, loosely fitting generally, but kind of the Indian style of headscarf. Again, women are allowed to wear turbans, and there's actually a long history of like women warriors in Sikhism. Usually, women warriors are represented with turbans on too, because turbans are a little more effective than headscarves in battle. Any other questions about any of that?
I have one question. From what I've kind of watched, mostly I've watched a bunch of documentaries. There is a type of martial art that's taught to the Sikhs. Well, what do you know about that? I'm just kind of curious.
So I my spouse said I should have added that. But yeah, so it's called Gatka. And so, like I said, there's a long history of Sikh warriors, although they take a lot of pride in the defensiveness of the warrior, the warrior calling. It's not, they do not like to be seen as aggressor warriors, but as defensive warriors, as protective warriors. So Gatka is a really popular kind of art and both art and like entertainment. There's like, you can watch entire documentaries, like you said, about basically Sikh military tradition, and Gatka comes from that. There's a, when I mentioned that Guru Gobind Singh and some of the later gurus really instituted a warrior tradition, they created a whole regimen, if you will, of how to prepare for battle. And this was very new to the area. This is I'm focusing on the religious piece, but that's a little more kind of cultural piece of Sikhism. Gatka looks a lot like kind of dancing and fighting at the same time. There's often a lot of Gatka at Sikh celebrations, especially what they call Hola, which is a holiday that comes right after Holi for Hindus. And it's a celebration of kind of the warrior tradition in particular. Lasts about 3 days. And, they do this dancing with swords. If we have time, I'll show a little bit of video for anybody who would like to see it, and I'll send it in the recap email to get a little context.
Do you know much about Raja Yoga or Kundalini?
Myself?
Well,
not a
just
lot.
The relation to the faith.
Sorry?
Just the relation to the faith.
So, I don't know. I do know. I mean, what do you know about Kundalini yoga?
I did a series of Kundalini yoga training, and it's another style of yoga. I think one that most people have heard of is Vinyasa, which is more in the teachings of Hinduism and perhaps a little Buddhism. And this is grounded in most of the language that you've spoken about tonight. And you chant Wahu Guru, as the truth is within me, kind of a lot of mantra, and some movements that sometimes feel like shaking, to a lot of like release of tension through small, like Pilates, kind of small intentional movements that tighten and then release to kind of make space for light.
Yeah, no, that's cool. I don't know. So the only thing I know about the connection there is that, so you'll probably meet two different types of Sikhs in the United States. One is the Khalsa Sikhs, which is the vast majority of the worldwide population. They're almost always, not always, Indian. And then the second group is a group that kind of is a newer religious movement related to Sikhism called Healthy, Happy, Holy, or 3HO. And I know that they practice Kundalini yoga they do a lot of the same practices here. The most common thing you'll see with 3HO is that you'll have a large group together, and they will all be in white. So that's a related movement, but
the Kundalini teachers wear all white,
right,
and many of the practitioners would only show up wearing all white.
right. So it's very like, I don't know. I mean, I'd be interested in like what percentage of the overlap there is there, because I haven't done a whole lot of studying on Kundalini yoga or 3HO, but I just know that they're connected, and that's that's all.
What I think is interesting is the people that I know. There are a number of teachers in Omaha and a number of studios that teach that style of practice, but none of the teachers are Sikh.
Yeah, you will also see if you go online and look up some words, like if you look up Guru Nanak, you'll get a variety of different religious traditions or like spiritual traditions that will utilize a lot of that, because, and I'm going to do a little soapbox on Hinduism here. So Hinduism, the culture of most of Hinduism is, it's okay to kind of accept other traditions within your own. So Guru Nanak can be Hindu to a lot of Hindus. And same with like Buddha is an avatar of Vishnu to many Hindus. Like even Jesus is seen as an avatar of Vishnu sometimes to Hindus. There's kind of that adoption mechanism. So when you look, if you decide to look at like more videos on Sikhism, keep that in mind, because you'll see different people talking about the same thing, but they don't necessarily represent each other. Like there's a person named Sadhguru, who's I have some critiques of as a personal thing. Just he's a kind of Hindu nationalist, but he kind of represents himself as Sikh. So you have some of that for sure. This person is volunteering to clean the sides, because this is a popular area for people to sit, by the way. So let's talk about a few things that are happening today or recently as well. So there's been a movement of Sikhs toward particularly Canada, mostly because people go where others are, right? The Sikh community came to Canada, especially after Operation Blue Star or the Golden Temple Massacre. So under Indira Gandhi, there was rising tensions between the Sikh community in the Punjab and the kind of Hindu nationalist community. There were some instigators on both sides of that conflict, but trying to figure out how to say this. So the story is that the KGB from Russia told Indira Gandhi that there were terrorists that were taking refuge in the Golden Temple. And the Golden Temple, of course, is that huge temple where everybody goes. And the Indian government sent about 10,000 troops, and a couple hundred people were killed or were a casualty. And after this, the tensions got even worse. A couple of her Sikh bodyguards assassinated her, and there were anti-Sikh riots, and there's just tons of people were killed or driven out of their homes after all this conflict. So quite a few people moved out of fear for their lives to different countries, and you'll see a large portion of Sikhs in Canada. They actually make up about 2% of the population, I believe, and which is actually a very similar portion to India, 2%ish. So I think that's important to keep in mind. And also on a side note with this, while Sikhs have been religious minorities in virtually every country they've been in, part of this Golden Temple massacre comes from a want for a country. That the partition didn't separate a nation for the Sikhs, who clearly make up a majority in the Punjab region, but they can't get Pakistan or India to agree to it. So that's when those tensions rose. And then with, let's see here. So in this picture here on the side, this is the largest Gurdwara in the United States, and it's in San Jose. Again, you'll see that if you look closely that there's doors on all four sides, and that's pretty common. It looks a little bit like if you were to combine, in my opinion, kind of combine a Hindu temple and a mosque, there's a lot of art that's shared there. So like I said before, much of Sikh culture is surrounded in interfaith interaction, interfaith dialogue. If you go to major interfaith events like the Parliament of World Religions, you will see a larger portion of Sikhs there than they represent in the United States. So I think I'd like to see if there are any more questions about Sikhism, about the context, or anything along those lines. Okay.
Is there a Sikh community in Omaha that you're aware of?
Oh, yeah. So there isn't a Gurdwara, but there are Sikhs. My neighbor at my last apartment was a Sikh. I know that there are like about a dozen families or something along those lines. We've actually reached out to the Sikh Coalition to see, to kind of get an idea of their needs here, but they're fairly small. There is a small community though. Like I said, most Gurdwaras are further west, especially California and Texas. Both have a fairly large Sikh community. New York City, other major urban centers. All right, so I'll just start wrapping up then here. I would like to suggest a few resources. So Sikhism, A Short Introduction by Eleanor Nesbitt. That's a really tiny book. It's one of those Oxford A Short Introduction books. If you just want to learn a good amount about something, I actually encourage those in general, those Oxford A Short Introduction books. They're usually less than 100 pages, I believe. The Guru Granth Sahib is available online for free. It's pretty expensive to buy the physical copy because it's 1,500 pages, so you have to buy about 5 books. But that's worth it. As well as I mentioned earlier, the Janam Sakhis are pretty entertaining. A lot of Guru Nanak's stories surround critiquing clergy or practices that he thought were silly. So he's a little bit of a trickster, but also very spiritual at the same time. Also, See No Stranger by Valerie Kaur. This actually just came out not too long ago. Valerie Kaur is a Sikh activist. I know we're having a conversation about bringing her. I think it's probably in August if we get that worked out.
Virtually bringing her.
Yeah, virtually bringing her, not physically. But she'll be available, and it's a very good book. She's very well known in the interfaith activist sphere. And then this fourth book is the one that I mentioned earlier, The Gift of Our Wounds. It's about a former white supremacist who's Arno Michaelis, and the son of one of the deceased in the Wisconsin Sikh Temple Massacre, Pardeep Kaleka. I think it's a very good book, whether you want to learn about Sikhism or white supremacy. I think both are treated well. They kind of take turns on creating chapters around the aftermath of that. And I think it's all these, the Gift of Our Wounds, See No Stranger, and Sikhism: A Short Introduction are something a lot of people should read. So, but that is all I have for you today. If you have any other questions, I'd be glad to talk with you about them, or any comments. I do have a survey though, if you all would take that.
I just put it in the chat.
Okay, thank you.
Jeremy, when you send out the recap and everything, can you send that the hymn that I read aloud?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I think that one's very particularly beautiful to me. It's interesting to think about, in my opinion, that the founding of Sikhism really overlaps with kind of, if we're going to make it about ourselves for a second here in America, that's like basically very early American history. The final guru dies after the Revolutionary War, not too long after that, 1799-ish. So just to kind of give a little bit of context of, what is happening other places during that time. So, but thank you all. I appreciate it, and hope you come next time. Next time will be on, it's called What is Religion? It'll be about how people have defined religion over the past couple centuries. And we'll talk a little bit about how that might impact how we view our own.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, have a good one.